Today we're going to talk about modes. Modes actually go clear back to the Renaissance and the medieval period in music. There was actually Greek tribes that had different names, and they would use these different scales to announce the arrival of officials or to tell another group that they were coming, and they would use that for the basis of their melodies. This idea of modes got somewhat lost in the Baroque period and the Classic and Romantic period, came back in the Impressionistic period with composers like Debussy and Ravel, and then made its way back as a strong part of the jazz sound, especially when jazz became a modal music with Miles Davis's kind of Blue album and other modal type of albums, especially John Coltrane in the 60s and Wayne Shorter and Herbie Hancock and people like that who started improvising a lot with modes. So the understanding of modes is important not only to jazz but also in your understanding of classical, European classical music. Well, to get the idea of modes, let's go ahead and start with the basics. Let's go back to our C major scale. Here's our C major scale. Okay. And before it was known as the C major scale, it actually had a different name, and it was known as the Ionian mode. So if you ever hear someone talking about the Ionian mode or the major scale, same thing, basically the same difference. Originally, when the Ionian mode was presented back in the medieval and Renaissance period, there was only one Ionian mode, and that was C, because back in those days, there weren't sharps and flats, accidentals, key signatures, anything like that. We just had our 7 notes of the musical alphabet. But gradually, as we came into different keys and different major scales, and we started to have Ionian mode could be built from different pitches. So what you're seeing in front of you here is what's called the C Ionian mode. But we could also have, in jazz, an E-flat Ionian mode. The E-flat Ionian mode would be the same thing as the E-flat major scale. We can build it with a key signature. 3 flats is E-flat, E-flat, F, G, A-flat, B-flat, C, and D. There's the E-flat Ionian mode. So why would we need to use this, or why would we need to learn this Ionian mode? Well, here's the idea. When you build triads on every scale, degree of the major scale, you see that sometimes you're going to have major triads and sometimes you're going to have minor or maybe even other kinds of chords. Let's go ahead and look at that right now. So I'm going to build just a triad on every scale degree of my major scale. Now let's see if we can determine what kinds of chords exist on each of these. So the first one, C, E, G. Well, that's a major chord. C major. D, F, A. That's a minor chord. The 2 chord in a major key is minor. In fact, we even have a Roman numeral system. Large or uppercase Roman numeral stands for a major chord, and a lowercase Roman numeral stands for a minor chord. So this is going to be a 2. E, G, B. Okay, that's a minor chord. And then we get a lowercase 3 standing for minor. F, A, C. There, that's a major chord built on 4. G, B, D. Another major chord. A, C, E. That one's a minor chord. A minor. And that last one, B, B, D, F. That one sounds minor, sounds funny, but it's actually a diminished chord. And for diminished chords, they get a lowercase Roman numeral with a circle. When you get more into jazz theory and music theory, you understand why it's important to know about these Roman numerals. It helps us to play things in different keys without shouting out specific chord names. For example, if I'm in the key of C and I say a 5 chord, I could either say a G chord or I could say 5. If I'm in the key of C, the 5 chord is a G major triad. If I'm in the key of E flat, the 5 chord is a B flat major triad. So I can say just go to the 5 instead of saying go to B flat. Or in another key, F sharp, I could say go to the 5 chord. And that would mean go to a C sharp major chord instead of having to yell out go to a C sharp chord. Really, it just makes things easier and helps you with transposition, playing things in different keys, so on and so forth. And it just helps with your understanding about how chords naturally want to move. So here's our 7 chords that we most frequently see in the key of C. Now, let's say I'm an improviser and I'm in the key of C and I see a C major triad. Well, I'm tired of just playing on those rhythmic modes and on the tones of the triad. I actually want to play some more notes. So you can see that probably the most logical scale that I could play if I'm in the key of C and I see a C major triad is the C major scale. There. Those collections of pitches are going to sound really nice on a C major chord. Let's go ahead and look at the example there. Here's a little melody on a C major chord using a little melody made up from the C Ionian or the C major scale. Okay, same thing could be in B flat. If I'm in the key of B flat and I see a B flat major chord, it makes sense that the scale that would most logically go along with that would be the B flat major scale. Here's a little melody given to you there. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so that's the first thing to understand about modes. The Ionian mode is the same as the major scale. If I see a major chord, my first and safest choice would be to use a major scale. Major chord, major scale, and that's the Ionian mode. Now, what about some of these other chords here? We've got all kinds of different chords here. Well, let's look at a minor chord. Okay, we've got 3 minor chords: D minor, E minor, and A minor. Well, your first reaction, if you've had probably any classical training at all, is if I see a minor chord, I'm going to play a minor scale. For example, if I see C minor, I'm going to play the C minor scale, the C natural minor scale. Or if I see A minor, I'm going to use the A natural minor scale. That would be your first instinct, your first reaction. That's actually not what jazz players do. And here's the reason why. There's a chord progression in jazz. It's evolved basically from the early days of jazz through the swing period, through the bebop period, hard bop, even into the 60s type of jazz, which we call post-bop, and all kinds of standard tunes. There's this one chord progression that shows up more than anything else, and that chord progression is called a 2-5-1. 2-5-1. These 3 chords appear more frequently than any other chord progression, either the 2-5 part by itself or the entire 2-5-1. So you can see that the 3 chords we're going to see the most are going in the key of C are going to be this D minor chord, and then moving along to this G chord, which actually we're going to see that it has another note. We'll talk about sevenths later, but that 7th chord, that G 7th chord or 5-7, is a very important part of this progression, and then finally ending on a 1. Well, you can see, and we've already talked about on this 2-5-1, that when we get to that 1 chord, that major chord, we're going to actually play the Ionian mode of the major scale. But what about the 2 chord? Well, if you know anything about the natural minor scale, you'll know that it's not the same thing as a major scale starting on 2. The relative minor is actually the 6. If we were in the key of C major, the relative minor would be A minor. So that's actually not the scale that jazz musicians choose the most. We actually take the major scale and start it on 2. If I'm in the key of C and I see a D minor chord, I'm actually going to think the C major scale but start it on D. Let's look at that a little more closely. So here I am on a C major scale. Okay, and I went a little bit past the octave there. If I'm in a C major scale and I see a D minor chord, I'm actually going to play the C major scale starting and ending on D. Right there. Okay, so I'm in the key of C, I see a D minor chord, and I'm going to play this scale. It has an unusual sound if you're not used to that sound. It sounds kind of like minor, but it's got a little funny edge to it. But anyway, this scale, which is the most commonly played scale for a jazz musician when they see a minor chord, is called the Dorian mode. the Dorian mode. Okay? Now, one way to think of the Dorian mode is I'm going to take a major scale, I'm going to start on 2. So if I see a D minor chord, I'm going to say, okay, D minor, the D is the second note of what major scale? The D is the second note of the C major scale. So the D Dorian mode is the C major scale starting on D. So instead of the C major scale, we're going to take that scale and just start it on 2. Okay? This is the way a lot of people think of the Dorian mode. It's a major scale starting on 2. But some people have a hard time figuring out, well, what major scale it is and how far down do I go or do I go up? So another way is to compare this Dorian mode to a major scale. Let's, for example, compare the D Dorian mode to the D major scale. Well, if I had a D major scale, the notes of a D major scale would be D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp. There's the notes of a D major scale. So if I know my major scale and I want to make it Dorian, I just take my major scale, and you can see that to make it Dorian, this would not be F sharp and C sharp, it would be F natural and C natural. So I'm going to take those two pitches and lower them. So in other words, I'm going to lower the third, and I'm going to lower the seventh. Okay? So instead of F sharp, it's going to be F natural, and instead of C sharp, it's going to be C natural. So two ways about thinking Dorian. Okay? The Dorian mode is a major scale starting on 2, or the Dorian mode is a major scale with a lowered third and a lowered seventh. Two ways to think about it. But always remember, if you're trying to play D Dorian, or F Dorian, or G Dorian, or whatever it is, you're going to start on that pitch. The D Dorian mode does not start on E. The D Dorian mode does not start on C. The D Dorian mode starts on D, and it is the C major scale starting on D. Let's look at some of the melodies that are given to you. Here's another example on a D minor chord. An example down there, number 5. We have a D minor chord, and then a melody that sounds something like this. A 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, nice little melody, all using notes of the Dorian mode. Let's go to C Dorian. Now thinking C Dorian, I have to think C is 2 of what? C is 2 of B flat. So the C Dorian mode is the B flat major scale starting on C. Or you could think C Dorian. C Dorian is the C major scale, but lowering the third and the seventh. So I would take that E and that B flat and lower them, and that would give me my C Dorian mode. Let's look at this melody for C minor. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, 2, 3, 4. Okay, nice little jazz sound. So remember, the main difference between Dorian and our normal minor sound that we're used to is that 6th scale degree. Usually in D minor, we would have a B flat also, but here we have a raised 6th scale degree. So that's the idea with Dorian. So I see a minor chord, my first and best choice, for right now anyway, is to use the Dorian mode. Okay, let's talk about another scale. Now, remember we talked about this 2-5-1 being the most important little chord progression in jazz. It happens all over the place. Sometimes you might look at a standard tune and you might see as much as 65 to 95% of the tune is either 2-5s or 2-5-1s. So that's why it's important for jazz musicians to know how to navigate through that chord progression. If you're really familiar with melodic practices and things that you can do, quotes and licks and riffs and parts of solos that all work over a 2-5-1, if you see a tune you've never seen before, you'll be able to navigate through 65 to 95% of that tune without ever having seen the tune before. So let's look at the next one. That's the 5. Well, the 5, when we just built it as a triad, that was a major triad. But this particular 5 has a slightly different sound, especially when you build it up to the 7th. We'll get more about 7ths later, but for right now, you can see that when we build that 7th, it gives you this sound. And this sound is what we call a dominant 7th. Let's go ahead and erase our Dorian mode up here. Okay. The dominant 7th chord, which actually looks like this. G7. Letter followed by number. G7, D9, E flat 13, F sharp 11. Those are all examples of dominant chords. Letter followed by number, especially if that number is an odd number. Sometimes you might see even numbers next to pitches like A2 or E flat 6. Those wouldn't be dominant types, but if it's an odd number followed by, if it's a letter followed by an unnumbered, that's a dominant type. When you see a dominant type, generally it's acting like a 5. Okay? So let's think about what scale we would use on that one. Let's think about it a couple ways. One, let's go back to our major scale. Remember how we talked about Dorian is the major scale starting and ending on 2. Well, then it seems to make sense then if we have this chord built on 5 that we would use the major scale starting and ending on 5. Let's look at that. And here was our octave right here. Okay, so that's a C major scale going up more than an octave. Okay, I went that far. Okay, so if we're going to build this new mode, since it's the 5 chord, probably the scale that's going to work best for this 5 chord is the C major scale, starting and ending on 5. So here's our 5th scale degree there, and we're going to end up here. Actually, we only need to go as far as the F. It's 7 different pitches. So that little bracket gives us our C major scale starting and ending on 5, and it sounds like this. Okay. And that one has a name too, and it's called the Mixolydian mode. Okay? If I see a dominant chord, letter followed by number only, without a big M or a small m or a circle or a triangle or anything like that, if I see that dominant chord, I'm going to use the Mixolydian mode. And one way we can develop that Mixolydian mode is by taking your pitch and saying, okay, that pitch is 5 of what major scale? The G Mixolydian mode is the C major scale starting and ending on G. That's one way to think of it. So for example, the E flat Mixolydian mode, you'd have to ask E flat is 5 of what? E flat is 5 of A flat. So the E flat Mixolydian mode is the A flat major scale starting and ending on E flat. So that's one way to think of it. Another way to think of it is, like we did on the Dorian, compare the Mixolydian mode to the major scale. So here we have a G Mixolydian mode. What's different about this G Mixolydian mode as compared to a G major scale? Well, the G major scale wouldn't have an F natural in it. Remember, G major has 1 sharp in its key signature, and that would be up here at F. That's the G major scale. So if we want the Mixolydian mode, another way is to take a major scale and lower the 7th. Only 1 note difference between Mixolydian and the major scale. So our Mixolydian mode, you can take a major scale and lower the 7th. So here's the G major scale. And here's G Mixolydian. Okay. Mixolydian, take a major scale and lower the 7th. Dorian was take a major scale and lower the 3rd and the 7th. Mixolydian is a major scale starting and ending on 5. And Dorian was a major scale starting and ending on 2. So let's look at the couple of melodic patterns given to you in example 8 here. Let's look at the G Mixolydian melody in example 8. Here's our G 7th chord, and here's our little melody using G Mixolydian. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, here's one on F. Let's think about the F Mixolydian mode. So the F Mixolydian mode I'm going to use when I see a dominant chord. F followed by number. F7, F9. Okay? F Mixolydian, you can think of the F major scale and lower the 7th. That would be the F major scale, the 7th would be E, so I'm going to lower it to make it an E flat. Or the other way is you think F is 5 of what? Now don't go up 5, don't go F, G, A, B, C, but you go down 5. F is the 5th of F, E, D, C, B flat. So F is the 5th note of the B flat major scale. F Mixolydian is the B flat major scale starting on F. Whichever way you think about it is fine. You just need to figure out one way and that'll work for you. So here's that little melody on the F7. A 1, 2, 3, 4. 2, 3, 4. Okay. You can see it's a little bit different than the F major scale. It's got an E flat in it. Now also one more thing is, generally with these modes, when you're creating melodies, the notes of the chord are usually the 1, 3, 5, and 7 of the mode. So for example, on my Mixolydian here, my G, B, D, and F are my chord tones, and my other ones, A, C, and E, are my non-chord tones, or what you might call the passing tones. So when you're trying to create a good melody using Mixolydian, you want to keep in mind that the 1st, 3rd, 5th, and 7th are your chord tones, and the other ones are your passing. In general, and it's not a rule that has to work all the time, but in general, you want to keep chord tones on the beats and the passing tones in between the beats. And you find a lot of the great improvisers did the exactly opposite of that. But to begin with, it's a good idea to keep the chord tones on the beats and the passing tones in between the beats. So you can see in example 10, what's circled there is the chord tones, and those are happening on the beat, and the things in between are your passing tones. Let's listen to this little 2-5-1 phrase. 1, 2, 3, 4. One more time. 1, 2, 3, 4. 2, 3, 4. Okay, yeah. Keeping the chord tones on the beats. Okay, last thing, let's look at some of these exercises. Exercise number 1, building a few Ionian and Dorian and Mixolydian modes. Let's see. Okay, let's go ahead and erase. I think we can erase all of this now. Okay. Start with the first one, F Ionian. Probably the easiest way to build F Ionian would be to give yourself the key signature of F, which is 1 flat, and then just build a major scale. There you go. There's F Ionian. If you want, you can abbreviate it to IO. Okay. How about B flat Dorian? Well, let's try it the way where we build a major scale and then lower the 3rd and the 7th. Remember, that's what we do for Dorian. So B flat major scale would have B flat and E flat in it, and would look like this. Okay. Take the second note. Right? Dorian is lower the 3rd and the 7th, so the 3rd note is right here, D, lower it, and the 7th note is right there, A, lower that. So the B flat major scale became Dorian by lowering the 3rd and the 7th. And let's try the next one. Now, one thing I also need to make sure you realize is that B flat Dorian starts on B flat. When you're writing a B flat Dorian mode, don't start it on C. It doesn't start on 2, it starts on the name of the mode, but it is the 2nd scale degree of another scale. This one happens to be the 2nd note of the A flat major scale. Let's go ahead and build the E flat Mixolydian mode that way. This one was B flat Dorian. Okay, and now we're going to build E flat mix. You can abbreviate DOR and mix. Okay, E flat mix. Okay, now remember this. E flat mix, that would be the 5th mode of some major scale. So E flat is 5 of what? Well, if you go down 5, you'll find that E flat is the 5th note of the A flat major scale. So if we put our key signature of A flat here, and then just write the notes E flat up to D flat, we get our E flat Mixolydian mode. The E flat Mixolydian mode is the 5th mode of A flat. Okay. So that's how to build those different scales from different pitches. Let's look at the second exercise there. Build a melodic line over the following chords. Keep chord tones on the beats. Now, you don't have to put a chord tone on every beat. It's just saying that when you use chord tones, they should be on beats, and when you use passing tones, they should be in between the beats. Okay, so let's see. G minor 7 for 2 measures. Okay. 2 measures of G minor 7. All right, what mode am I going to use on G minor 7? Remember, for major 7th chords, you use Ionian. For dominant seventh chords, you use Mixolydian. And for minor seventh chords, we're going to use Dorian. So the notes I'm going to have to choose from here are going to be G, A, B flat, C, D, E, and F natural. There's my G Dorian mode. Okay. All right. So let's see. Well, I can use one of those rhythmic modes from before. I can just make up a rhythm. In fact, just the fact that I'm keeping the chord tones on beats and using the passing tones in between, try to move mostly stepwise. If you're going to use leaps, try to leap up the chord. Don't just leap arbitrarily anywhere you feel like it. So how about if I do something like this? 1 and 2 and 4 and 1 and 1 and 2 and 4 and 1 and. Okay, I think I'll start by just arpeggiating right up the chord. Okay, if I use the chord tones, I know they all sound good, and I know that I'm going to have chord tones on the beats. They can also have chord tones in between the beats. You have to make sure you don't use too many of those in between the second, fourth, and sixth scale degrees happening on the beat. So that's where you get kind of your weak sound. Okay, bob-a-doo-da. We had 1 and 2 and 4 and 1 and. How about this is 4 is going to be on a beat, so I'm going to put a chord tone there. And then I'll just go down like this. There, I made sure that I kept my chord tones on beats, right? The notes of a G, B flat, D are on my beats there. And then how about 1 and 2 and a little rest here. 1 and 2 and 4 and 1 and da da. How about 3 and? Okay, so why don't I don't know, I'll just end it with a chord tone. Now I think I'm going to go 3 and 4. 3 and 4 at the end. All right, so how about if I put a chord tone here, B flat, and then my passing tone right there, and then ending on a chord tone again on beat 4. This is a B flat. Remember, it carries over from earlier in the measure. So all together, with chord tones on beats and passing tones in between the beats, I get this. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 2, 3, 4. Okay, that's a nice little thing there. Okay, so that's the idea with Ionian, Dorian, and Mixolydian. Ionian is the major scale. It's used on major seventh chords. Dorian is the major scale starting and ending on 2, or with a major scale with a lowered third and seventh, and it's used on minor chords. And Mixolydian is a major scale starting and ending on 5, or a major scale with a lowered seventh, and that's used on dominant type chords. We'll talk about other modes and how they're used on different scale degrees, different chords from the key. Actually, the beginnings of the chord-scale relationship discussion starts now, and this is one that goes on for quite a while, so we'll get a lot more discussion about modes.